Hi, I'm Lori from HIStalk. Welcome and thanks for joining us for today's HIStalk webinar titled CernerLeidos DoD Impact the Win Will Have on the HIS Industry. It's brought to you by HIStalk. I have a few housekeeping items to make you aware of before we start the webinar. Attendee phone lines have been muted to prevent background noise. You can use GoToWebinar's questions box in the console to submit questions to our presenters at any time. You may want to familiarize yourself with that now. The presenters will answer questions during Q&A at the end. You can also use the questions box or the chat function to send questions or comments to me during the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll receive a link to the recording as well as a PDF version of the PowerPoint presentation in a follow-up email. Most of you will remember our webinar in November of last year, shortly after Cerner announced their acquisition of Siemens. We brought together two seasoned industry experts to give you their views on what you could expect. Frank Poggio and Vince Ciotti gave us their unbiased opinions along with a little history. It was by far our most widely viewed webinar ever. Now that the dust has settled after the DoD announced that Cerner and Leidos won their EHR contract, Frank and Vince are back to tell us what they think about the selection and how they think it will impact the industry. Frank is the founder and president of the Kelson Group, where he focuses on ONC certifications and market and product strategy. He has a long history of executive roles in healthcare IT companies like Pharmacy Data Systems, Mediware, Citation Computer Systems, Health Microdata Systems, and the University of Wisconsin Hospital. Vince is the co-founder and principal at HIS Professionals, where he consults with client hospitals on system selections, contract negotiations, and IT assessments. Prior to that, he held leadership roles in vendor organizations like Micro Health Systems, HIS, McAuto, and Shared Medical Systems. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Vince.
Well, thank you very much, Laurie. And your introduction covered a lot of our first slide. But Frank, why don't you tell the folks a little bit of your gory details here?
Oh, I don't think they need to hear that. They can read them and dream about them or whatever. So you go through yours, Vince.
I'm impressed you can remember back that far, Frank. It's very impressive. And here's a little bit of mine, so we won't bore you with this either. Let's jump right to the heart of it. What are we going to talk about? Here's a high-level table of contents, the surprise factor, the impact on Cerner, what it means to Siemens clients, alternative vendors that they might be considering, and a little fun lessons from the past. Frank, why don't you talk about these last 5 topics?
And then we're going to talk about some of the history of Leidos coming from SAIC, hit on the lessons going forward, which was obviously very important, and the impact on other vendors. We're going to talk a little bit about the Commonwealth program that's been put in place, and hopefully at the end we go through some important lessons from the recent Cerner win.
And Frank, I'll turn it over to you because this is really a big shock, I think, wasn't it?
Well, it's a shock to you, but I was always on the fence, having dealt with government contracts way back when I had hair on my head. You know, if you're not into that Washington thing, things get pretty difficult. So I think the first point is that people have to realize that Cerner didn't necessarily win this contract. Leidos won it. Cerner just happens to be one of the subcontractors, a significant one nonetheless, but it was pretty much Leidos. As a matter of fact, the actual wording of the award is given to Leidos. And why else did they win? Well, obviously marketing is very important. The whole idea of Commonwealth was very timely as it relates to Cerner and this particular bid. The other reason is I believe, and I'll go through some numbers in a little bit, that Cerner kind of lowball this, and that leads to other discussions, I'm sure, as we move on. And one of the other elements that is rarely mentioned is that Leidos, or in the company of SAIC in the past, is the contractor to support the Vista product that's running in the DoD facility. So, you know, if the old saying goes, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and if you got somebody on the inside, it can't hurt. So in my book, that's kind of why I believe Cerner won. And on the offside, why would Epic lose? Essentially, you could blame it on the partners, I suppose. I mean, as everybody knows, Epic has always been low-key when it comes to lobbying, marketing, those kinds of things. Didn't really have a Washington presence till a few years ago, and relied, I'm sure, heavily upon IBM and their other partners to kind of take that governmental lead. And, you know, as big and wonderful and as IBM has been over the years, they've been losing some traction. I wouldn't be surprised if their Washington presence isn't quite as sterling as it might have been in years past. So the lobbying effort may have not been quite as sharp as it was in Leidos' case. Then on the other side of the coin, so to speak, Cerner did a darn good job in the last year or so about market perception on interoperability issues. I mean, this is something that's been kicked around back and forth in HIStalk and other blogs. You know, is Epic interoperable or is it not? And then, of course, Cerner taking the role with Commonweal, which we'll get into in a full slide later. And then one might guess, and this is strictly a guess obviously on my part, but given the history of Epic and the way they've approached the market, I'd be very surprised if Judy was willing to lowball in this situation and maybe made a decision that, you know, quote, buying the business wasn't worth it all. Next slide, Vince.
Okay. I'll be honest, I was stunned. I assumed Epic was going to win, like I think most pundits were. They just have won every single large hospital and IDN deal for about the past 5 years, with the exception maybe of Intermountain Healthcare, which Cerner scooped on this grounds of customization, something Judy isn't as interested in, and Neil was much more eager to play ball with him. So I was shocked, I'll be frank, and I think the majority of HIS, quote, pundits, end quote, were stunned too. It was a shocker. Why did Epic lose? My theory is simply that Washington, D.C., as Frank said, is such a different world than the typical RFP. I put a few words down here that are maybe a little bit rude, but the lobbyists, the lunches, the golf courses, the cruises, the contribution to PACs, it's a whole different set of rules than any normal selection process. Look at New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation. Even though government-owned, they look very deeply into features and functionality, a monstrous RFP feature checklist, probably checked references, did a lot of stuff. And the DoD, being in Washington, D.C., is just a whole different world. I wonder, you know, were features even looked at? Did anybody call clients to see their satisfaction, how good implementations were done? I got a feeling in Washington, a whole different set of rules, so not a logical decision in my mind, although a huge one. I'm not discounting the size of it and the importance. It just wasn't the classic selection process we go through a lot. Frank, what do you think it hit Cerner with?
Well, you know, the good news, obviously, for Cerner is they got the contract, but it's always a good news, bad news world here, and Cerner must deliver to a government agency with a less than stellar track record, and as I mentioned a minute ago, the lowball price. And talking about that lowball price, Vince, you go to the next slide. Right. Next slide. Okay, there you go. You know, if you run the numbers a little bit, you know, this is kind of what it looks like. And I'll be the first to admit this is just a gross estimate, but the contract total is roughly $18 billion, and it's over 9 years. So that means that there's, in a simple way, $500 million a year, but that $500 million gets spread across at least 3 prime vendors and several other subs. And you've got Leidos in there and Accenture, and those are, neither one of those are quote cheap suits, if you will. So if you just do simple arithmetic, that means that there's roughly $125 million per vendor per year, but as many of us know, the bulk of that money, or a good slug of that money, goes towards the installation, is being done by Leidos and Accenture. So if Cerner were to see $125 million per year, that would be a good on their part. But of course, that's across 60 sites. So And again, back to the simple arithmetic and rough estimate, that means that Cerner would come out of this with roughly 20 million per site, and I'd be the first guy to say that's probably high. And then if you look at the non-governmental market, particularly large teaching facilities, and which complex facilities, which many of these DoD facilities are, you're looking at a typical EHR install in the everyday market of maybe $50 million. So, you know, is Cerner going to be able to make money on this? Yeah, they probably will. I mean, again, it's software, but that's yet to be seen. I just think that you know, if they come out of this with between 10 to 20 million per site, you know, that's just a couple of sales in the private market in a typical year. So, in any rate, it looks like it's going to be a little bit of a tough go, particularly, as I'll mention in a minute here, what some of the things Cerner has to do. Next slide, Vince. For example, under the contract as it's signed, nobody gets paid until there's an install. So there's quite an investment, if you will, up front as they're doing the installations to get their $10 or $20 million per site. And DoD is specifically requiring a number of customizations. And for example, well, not some of which deal with security capabilities, as you can imagine in a governmental situation. There's going to be some pretty complex security requirements, and of course then there's going to be a series, I'm sure, of functional customizations that are going to be required because military hospitals don't function the same way that your private non-governmental hospital operates. And so the other offside of this is Millennium, the DoD version of what becomes Millennium, cannot be sold to the general market. So you're making significant customizations, and you're not going to be able to repeat those, if you will, in the private market, or at least not without making, I'm sure, some changes to those, so that the feds don't think you're violating the contract. So the impact on Cerner, essentially, from a financial standpoint, is not negative, but I don't think that it's going to be as great as some people might imagine. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, doing a $10 or $15 million install essentially is not going to allow you a ton of profitability.
And what's the impact on the Siemens implementation? There are, gosh, 600-700 Siemens clients on Envision and Saurian, Med Series, Eagle, a whole array of products that we're all looking at what they wanted to do. And, boy, you'd question, can Cerner now still implement them as strongly? And my take, as you see here in the second bullet, is it should be minimal. With Leidos and Accenture getting the bulk of the days and dollars, Cerner's implementation team should not be impacted adversely. There's always the challenge of the veterans. The few really experienced project managers will be a little more of a paucity situation, and you'll be more rookies, I guess. I doubt if Cerner will ever follow Judy's model of liberal arts graduates right out of college. But they'll be hiring younger and younger people led by a few veterans. So probably more important for a Siemens client to check out that project manager they're going to be assigned, make sure he or she is a veteran, knows what they're doing. And in my last bullet here, I kind of feel bad for Cerner. A lot of hospital CEOs, CIOs, CFOs going to be scared. They're going to think that Cerner now hasn't got the ability to do their implementation as well. When, as Frank pointed out so well, it's Leidos and Accenture that are getting the bulk of the implementation work, not Cerner. And I think the support standpoint is not as major a factor. So that's my quick take on how this is going to impact the Siemens clients. But it's a complicated situation. What have they been doing? Frankly, the first rash of transitions we saw or heard about just drank the Kool-Aid. I mean, you go to that Vision Center in Kansas City, you're blown away. They've got the best marketing approach in history. It's just staggering. I guess it's impressive as a visit to Verona, which seems to work as well. Just a whole different perspective. Kansas City being pure marketing, Judy being pure vision itself, as opposed to this marketing approach. And the sales and marketing team of Cerner are just all over the place. I thought SMS Shared Medical System had the best sales team ever, and when Siemens bought them, it watered down a little bit. Germans having a different management and drove some of the veterans away. But Cerner picks up the real best of Siemens, adds it to their team. Wow, they're impressive. They will win the majority, I think, of the Siemens clients. Neil and all the officers in Kansas City are personally involved in sales. Reminds me of my old days at SMS when Jim Mackley or Harvey Wilson would do anything to make a sale. Kansas City still has that attitude, and that's key to being a successful public firm. And the last implication of some of these early Siemens contracts signed by Cerner was they wanted to get early in line for the implementation resources, which could have been wise. While there still are a lot of veteran project managers and some veteran installers around, have them working at your hospital quick before the line forms and you're either delayed or you get more rookies. Lately, though, the wonderful good news for us as a consulting firm is we're seeing a nice spurt of buyers. You may have seen our ad on HIStalk about the HS Buyer Seminar. It's finally getting full after being nearly empty the past couple of years, and I blame meaningful use. Hospitals just stopped switching EHRs and concentrated on what they had. And after testing for stages 1 and 2, stage 3 seems so improbable, so fuzzy, they're finally saying, maybe our EHR is old, let's take a look at some options. So we're doing a nice number of selections and negotiations, which, we're a tiny firm, only 6 of us at HS Professionals. When our business doubles, you can imagine what it does for a Dell or a Leidos or a Computer Science Corporation. And there are a lot of vendors out there. It's bewilderingly complex. I don't know how hospitals do it. And Frank, join me in this if you want to comment. Based on your size, the larger you are versus the smaller you are, different vendors you need to look at. The monsters, 400 beds and up, large AMCs, IDNs, always look at Epic. It's just a written, unwritten rule. Of course, Cerner, Millennium now, not the community work stuff, the Millennium. Allscripts, they're probably the big 3. GE seems very quiet these days, just losing clients on the hospital side, strong in physicians, but I don't even bother to type their name in here. And, of course, Siemens is shut down. So it's really the big ones. And then the mid-size, Frank, what I see is Meditech and Paragon dominating. Others that should be looked at, I think, offer good competition from a price-performance standpoint are Quadramed, the old Keen, now owned by NTT Data. And Cerner's pushing this Community Works more and more in the mid-size. Have you ever run across it, Frank, Community Works in the hospital marketplace?
Well, occasionally. It's essentially the remote deployment of Cerner from a larger facility.
It's a shared system, we think.
Right.
It's, in essence, 5 or 10 hospitals sharing one instance of Oracle. Lower cost, similar functionality. It's interesting that they would offer it themselves in the mid-range versus Millennium, but lower cost. That's attractive. Then little under 100 bedders, the kings in the past, CPSI, HMS, and Healthland are now renamed Evident, MedHost, something like SCIC becoming Leidos. Change your name these days. That's called branding. That's what everybody does. And there's some nice other alternatives for smaller hospitals to consider. NextGen, they bought Opus and Sphere for clinicals and financials. MedSphere, which is the open vista that DoD is now going to be changing with Leidos and Cerner. And Cerner's Community Works, surprisingly strong, about 100 critical access hospitals they claim on Community Works. And Allscripts has a community pricing model. They just sold an 80 bedder about a month ago, which is a shocker. Allscripts used to be, I thought of, just the high end, but they're now pushing down the little side too. And then if you're critical access, under 25 beds, there's 3 red-hot guys just jumping in. Athena Health, Jonathan Bush bought Razor Insights. Razor's a phenomenal SaaS, or cloud computing alternative. Prognosis is a very strong firm, been around for more years, and very strong at low price but fairly good functionality, as is CSS Ormed. Ormed's a rock-solid ERP, partnered with CSS, who had a strong patient accounting. That's where they got their name, was out of Illinois. Custom software systems. And they're looking for an EHR partner. They had one and it's gone away. So they're a little fuzzy, but look at the variety. 15 different vendors to look from, and I hope
Well,
we're sorting it by size here.
I think what's really interesting about that slide is you're just beginning to point out that there's a number of vendors still in that lower mid-sized, smaller world, and that's a tough place to live. First of all, you're limited in terms of number of facilities, obviously. But as you pointed out a couple of times, you got the big boys. You got Epic and Cerner and McKesson and whatnot, all stepping down in there. So, I mean, back in the 1980s, I started a software company with a focus on small and mid-sized hospitals, and I don't think I'd want to do it today.
We're really shocked about it. Athena Health buying Razor Insights. Of all the things to buy, Quadramed, for example, why they would buy such a tiny company that sells tiny little hospitals and makes just a few $1 million on each one?
Well, I think the rationale there is twofold. One of which, Athena is under a lot of pressure to have the one patient solution, if you will, which Epic started years ago, and quite honestly, as Cerner is been working towards with interfaces and Commonwealth, which we'll get into in a minute, but the Razor Insights product is literally new technology, and as Jonathan Bush likes to point out, everything he does is new technology, and he can't understand why nobody buys, or he can't understand why people still buy old technology, a la Epic, in his definition, and why hospitals aren't smart enough to only buy new technology. So at least he practiced what he preached. He bought Razor Insights, which is a very new, relatively speaking, product that does the HIS/EHR, and that gives him a way to say I can do the one patient thing. Now, of course, he's got to get those two major systems to work together, which unfortunately has not I can't think of a vendor that's actually done it really successfully over the last 30 years. There's many technical reasons, but it's a tough mountain to climb.
Well, Frank, good lead into one of my upcoming slides here. We'll have some fun in a second. I want to talk briefly about the last Department of Defense deal, though, and I wonder if anybody out there is old enough to remember in the 1980s. I think it was around 85, DoD issued its last RFP, a monster one, they didn't call them EHRs in those days, it was a clinical system. Might even call it an HIS system, implying what the MIS Medical Information System of Lockheed and TDS at the time. And it was a huge deal, as you might imagine, large dollars, I forget the billions. And the leaders in those days were Technicon, then it was known as TDS, Technicon Data Systems. My old SMS, we had Action, both the 4-phase and the DEC versions. Envision didn't come out till 1990, it was still Action. And Makoto, which I worked for around 1980 in St. Louis, had HDC, Hospital Data Collection on DEC, and PCS Patient Care System on Tandem. They had hundreds of clients. TDS was the rocket ship. They had, this was, years before Steve Jobs stole the idea of a mouse from Xerox. They had a light pen system. You could click on a screen for CPOE. It was stunningly modern. And TDS had to win. They had the best system easily. SMS had the best sales team. Sales, and that's what SMS stands for, Sales and Marketing Systems. And Makoto had McDonnell Douglas. Think of the lobbyists at their disposal. They had to have a great chance at selling DC, since they sold billions of airplanes to them for defense contracts every year. Huge RFP went out. These 3 semifinalists were asked to build demo sites. The DoD had the sense to say, build me one first before we pick a winner. And with that, SMS said, goodbye. They kind of smelled that would cost a lot of money, and they didn't have a lot of Washington, D.C. clout. And the finalists became TDS, Makoto, and a funny little consulting firm that had no hospital system and no clients. All they had was a proposal. Can you remember their name, Frank?
Yeah, it was SAIC, I believe.
Who ever heard of them? So it's hysterical that 30 years later, the same company, maybe that's why they changed their name. By calling themselves Leidos, people wouldn't realize it's the same game. It's the same brilliant lobbyists in Washington, D.C. won again. And they're an incredibly successful company. Formed in '69, same year as Meditech and SMS were formed. John Beister was their founder. Went public in 2006, over $1 billion IPO, staggeringly successful firm. Bought Vitalize in 2011, which had 600 very experienced veteran consultants. A year later, bought Max IT for $500 million, over 1,000 consultants. To where today, SAIC has 40,000 employees, which, whew, almost as many as our congressmen and senators, and do $10 billion a year in revenue, which is staggering, although mostly non-healthcare, of course. And cute how they changed their name, almost like they didn't want people to go and Google SAIC and see that they won this old thing 30 years ago. But and Lori was telling us, Leidos, apparently do you remember the details, Frank? They thought it stood for kaleidoscope.
Yeah, the marketing guys picked the name because it's something to do with a kaleidoscope, and it means you can do all kinds of different things, I guess. I don't know. We'll find out.
But it's like CPSI becoming Evident and HMS becoming MedHost. Leidos, SAIC is now Leidos, so that makes them a lot better. So what do you learn from all this stuff? Well, I'll start and volunteer. If you're selling to the government, you got to pick your partner very, very wisely. For example, talk about wisdom. My co-founder, Bob Pagnotta, one of the geniuses of HIS, he formed MDS Medical Data System and ran timeshare back in the 70s. He bid at this RFP for the DoD back in the 80s. He joined with Martin Marietta. Why? Huge airplane company, huge Defense Department contracts, knew the Washington world and politics. McCoto, McDonnell Douglas sold F-18s and F-16s every day. I remember working in St. Louis, and every Thursday, 2 F-18s would take off. They'd shut down the St. Louis airport, total silence, no jets for a while, and then all of a sudden, rocket ships took off and went vertical, 10, 20,000 feet. It was 2 F-18s or F-16s produced a week, probably $20, $30 million each. And here we were selling our hearts off in an HIS system over a year that brought in maybe $1 or $2 million per sale. So here's a lesson in that airplane connection. Last year, Meditech partnered with Lockheed Grumman before they decided not to go too much further with the DoD deal. So picking a defense contractor is smart, and that's where Cerner was very wise. And of course, consulting partners. I put the word in quotes because when I was a young man, which is a couple centuries ago, a consultant was an experienced individual in some esoteric field, came into your facility, gave you advice, and walked out the door. And you paid for the advice, a couple hours or a couple days. Today, that's changed a little bit. Consultants are now vendors that make billions of dollars and never leave. And Leidos and Accenture are 2 of the best. As Frank did earlier, I would question Judy's selection of IBM. Does anybody know what the letters stand for?
I've been moved.
Isn't it? And Allscripts had the sense to partner with 2 other giants, Computer Science Corporation and Hewlett-Packard. MedSphere partnered with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and just everybody picks their partners smart, and that's the heart of a Washington decision.
Well, I think Vince, back on that slide, you know, if you just look at the list of the bidders and the partners, I mean, it almost, you know, stands out that, you know, a Leidos and an Accenture are heavyweights, and as you go down that list, they get lighter and lighter. You know, so as I said at the very beginning, I wasn't all that surprised. I was I'm not in your gee, it knocked me over class. So anyway, go ahead.
You're a wiser man than I. Now, number 8, what does this mean to other vendors? It is not going to have any negative impact on Epic to speak of. I mean, you can't count how many wins Epic takes every year. They have no PR department. There's no way you can get a list from anybody. But from someone who follows this industry for 45 years, Epic has won everything for the past 5 years except Intermountain Healthcare and a handful of small exceptions, and will continue to.
And as I mentioned earlier, Vince, just look at the numbers. So if Epic picks up 1 large hospital a year or 2, which is not unheard of, you know, that 20 million or 10 million number that Cerner's picking up, it could easily be surpassed. And, you know, the reality is, I don't care how big a company you are, you know, a contract like a DoD contract is going to take a lot of executive resources as well as, you know, worker bees, but there's just so many hours in a day and so many people and so on and so forth that it actually could be a Pyrrhic victory for Cerner. And if I was an Epic, if I was running Epic, I go, it ain't all bad, and it actually could turn out quite well. And it goes back to what I said earlier. Government contracts can, darn near kill you. And even Epic today, if you look at what's going on at the New York Health and Hospitals Corporation, I posted something on HIStalk way back when they got that contract, and my comment was, if Judy can pull this off without getting burned, the woman can walk on water. And here we are, and what was it, just the other day in HIStalk, they said that 2 executives in that whole thing, I guess a total of 4, have already been relieved of their duties, and it's over budget and so on and so forth. So I don't know, in my history in working in the HIS world, those government contracts, they're wonderful in terms of being big and impressive and great marketing, but I don't know, it's to make them work is another world.
Talking about history in the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation, in 1975, when I was at SMS, we won that deal over Makoto. It was a huge win for financial systems, mainly Envision, which are still running today, to this very day, Siemens Envision. They had Quadrumed's old CPR, computerized patient record for the EHR that Epic's displacing. And the executive in charge of Health and Hospitals Corporation at the time was a gentleman named Fred Moorfield, very smart, very wise man. I went up to give a sales pitch, and he just flushed me down the toilet. He said, no, I don't want to see slides over heads. He was a very smart man. And as you were just saying, Frank, about executives leaving, Fred got bounced out of Health and Hospitals Corporation, and guess where he ended up? Became a vice president at SMS. So there's interesting connections between large government organizations and their vendors.
Yep.
Now, there's 3 things shaking that, Frank, going to surprise you. You mentioned earlier how Epic is the only vendor with an integrated physician and hospital system. People use the word ambulatory, but I say physician because hospitals have a lot of ambulatory outpatient visits. And there's a couple of shockers going on here, 2 of the 3. The first shocker is Allscripts is rewriting its excellent SDK revenue cycle system as SFM, Sunrise Financial Manager, much more integrated with their Sunrise Clinical Suite than the old interfaced SDK. Pilot just went live this month, and it's not exactly Cerner's strength, so who knows? Maybe it'll make Allscripts a little more of a competitor to Cerner if they get this SFM to rock. And Meditech, hats off. They admitted that LSS, the Lake Superior system, was a dog, poorly interfaced to Release 6 or client server or Magic, built their own totally integrated physician practice system, and the pilot is live, I believe, right now, or maybe September, pretty darn recent. And it'll offer, again, totally integrated for the first time, physician and hospital system, almost as well as Epic's in paper. Dying to see how it works in reality. And lastly, give McKesson credit. They recognize their old Practice Partner and Practice Point Plus are pretty darn weak, poorly interfaced to Paragon. They started a project. They're about a year behind Meditech, I believe. They're forecasting a pilot live next year. And they'll finally be, competing with Epic for this true integration approach. So it's an interesting thing how the industry is learning from Ms. Halter. And this is a graph we did the last PowerPoint. I just updated it in red ink with these changes. The other big changes, Cerner pushing community works, more and more of the smaller hospitals. But the red ink here shows you what the new, and forgive my blanks in the lower red. I just ran out of time. Someday we'll fill that in too. Frank and I may do a whole webinar on just this one slide someday. Speaking of marketing, Frank, let's talk about Commonwealth.
Yeah, as I said in the very beginning, you got to give Neil and the boys credit for getting that thing going a year or so ago. It was, if nothing else, it's a great marketing concept. Whether it actually works or not remains to be seen. One of the interesting things about this DoD contract is that, and a lot of people don't maybe realize it, is more than 60% of the patients that are seen by the DoD in DoD hospitals or by the DoD are seen outside of DoD hospitals. So this is going to be an interesting challenge for Cerner and the team to get that, quote, interoperability that everybody wants. And they're going to have to move from concept to reality under that contract as I said earlier, in some cases before they get paid. But the other interesting part about Commonwealth is its primary focus is on creating a unique patient ID, which is something that Congress prohibited the CMS from requiring in the original 1996 HIPAA legislation. So if you go to the 1996 original HIPAA legislation, there actually is a clause or a paragraph in there that says that CMS will not be allowed to create a unique patient ID. And here we have Commonwealth with a, quote, government contract that, in the simplest description, has to create a unique patient ID across DoD and other facilities. And yet, on the other hand, Congress could make it all go away, could solve, quote, the big technical problem with the stroke of a pen. Of course, as I've said many times, politics makes terrible systems design, but nonetheless, that's what we're stuck with here.
Now, my take on Commonwealth is a little nasty, so my apologies to everybody out there, but I think it's just brilliant marketing to get every vendor on earth to sign up with your group except for Epic. It's like playing football, 10 people versus one person. Even Meditech, which has its proprietary cache-like database, it's MUMPS, but released 6P and Neil's very private version of it all these years later. The most difficult vendor to interface in the industry because of such a unique integrated job themselves. It's tough to pass their data to another system. So Commonwealth's brilliant marketing. I question technology, though. That we have interface engines, HL7, version 3.0 today, health information exchanges, regional health information organizations. I just question, what are we trying to do? Take a tie rod from a Ford and put it on the front end of a BMW, or take the steering wheel from a Lexus and bolt it into a Prius? It's a contradiction in terms, to me, with systems and different operating systems, programming languages, databases, to be able to just swap data back and forth. To me, it's more marketing than technology. Maybe I'm missing something. I'll defer to you experts out there. So what's our takeaways? I start with the fact that I think sales and marketing still, forgive the pun here, trumps everything else. The bigger your mouth, the bigger your audience, the more votes you're going to get. And Cerner has about 1,000 mouths in their sales and marketing department. Judy has about 20. And that's roughly the ratio of the strength of the two organizations. Government decisions, I think, are very, very peculiar. They're not exactly the most intelligent people in Washington, D.C. Far more what side you're on, red or blue, what packs you give contribution to than what your database or operating system is. And I think Eisenhower still had it right with the military-industrial complex. Who knows why they decided what they did. And the last thing I would state is do what the DoD did not do. Get on the phone and call dozens of hospitals your size in your state using the system you're looking at. Go on unchaperoned site visits, no salesman allowed. Have your director of HIM sit with another hospital director of HIM that's on the vendor you're looking at. And then talk shop, get the truth. Demos are, sales and marketing, and not a good barometer of what a system can do. And instead of these feature checklists for what we call RFPs, requests for prevarication, look at the user documentation. It's all online today. It's so simple. Get a code, go online, and look for the features you want to see. If you do an inquiry for ICD-10 and nothing comes up, you're in trouble. Frank, I don't know if you want to comment on any of these things. They're pretty vanilla. Now, here's things I would not take away. This does not mean Cerner is the best system in the country. It has very little to do with the functionality of Millennium versus the functionality of Epic. And the people that start quoting the DoD and saying that's why we're going to buy Cerner, I think are out of their minds. But that's my opinion. It's not the end of the road for Epic. Judy's not going to go back to human resources computing and work with her husband to work on a good EHR. I think she's going to continue to win every large hospital decision that's ever made. Leidos and Accenture are going to have a lot of rookies that they've got to hire, and their veterans will be as scarce as Cerner's veterans. And The good news is they will not be worried about the next project or selling the next system. All they're going to do is come in, give you honest advice, and leave. So hats off to these large consulting firms. And it's all interoperability. Nothing else counts. All vendors are going to convert to the same hardware, operating system, database, programming language. There's going to be no more variety in systems. It's got to be standardized. And poor Tim, HIStalk is done. Who needs to hear commentary when we now all know there's only one vendor and only one set of consulting firms to buy? So I think it's the end of HIStalk.
All right.
Sorry, we'll turn it over to you for Q&A, and if any attorneys want our home phone numbers, Frank and I'd be glad to confess.
So now we'd like to open it up to the audience for questions. As a reminder, use the questions section on the GoToWebinar panel to submit your questions, and I'll pose them. The first one, Chris would like to know, what about the push for reselling Epic to small hospitals by larger installations?
Fascinating. Good question, Chris. This is something Judy put in her contract years ago. Frank actually uncovered it too. Had some conversations with Judy about it. It originally enabled a large medical center that had the license for Epic to extend it to a smaller neighboring facility. I don't know, the bed, 50, 100 beds, something like that, at a very low cost. And I think it continued for a while. And lately, I heard, if I remember right, Frank, Judy suddenly opened up a remote hosting data center in Verona and may get into the remote hosting business.
Well, that's if you want to do it through Epic, but I think the question more relates to a large, an ACO situation and a large facility in a town that, puts the Epic solution in a managed or owned hospital, or even maybe just some kind of general arrangement. Typically, the way that Epic would sell their systems essentially is by the seat. So they didn't care if you had 3 hospitals or 1 hospital. If you bought 1,000 seats, you bought 1,000 seats, and you could put them on the moon if you wanted. And you essentially, every time you wanted a seat, you paid X dollars, several $1,000s, I forget the numbers. And of course, you paid an ongoing rate for that support and what have you. So it actually gets back to what I said earlier about in that small hospital market, because that means if you're a small hospital and you cut a deal with the local ACO or whatever, there's almost no capital investment to getting an Epic system. It's just you pay for the seats. And it's in this world where larger hospitals clearly want to operate and run smaller facilities. They'll even give you the seats sometimes, quote, for free, or at least they'll absorb the cost. So, in theory, you could wind up with a small hospital getting an Epic system for almost nothing, maybe the cost of installation. And that installation cost, those installation efforts are done by that larger facility. So, it's a heck of a way to expand your footprint, assuming you can, as a vendor, expand your footprint, assuming you can absorb the increase without getting a capital payment of some kind, which obviously Epic's been able to do.
I jump in. There's a little bit of weaknesses to it. You get that shared instance of the cache database that your large AMC built, their screens, their order sets, their reports. And that may not be very relevant to a critical access hospital or 75-bed community hospital. Every change in customization is an implementation cost, and the extent to which the large partner is willing to let you do it. And then support calls. You can't call Verona. You got to call your large partner, and they may not be 1/10 as responsive as Judy's people are. You're kind of at the mercy of this big partner, and my guess is the long-range goal of the big partner is to take you over. Once they have all your doctors' zip codes and admitting statistics, you're almost becoming partner with big partners. So it's a very complicated business decision, but an interesting technology approach. By the way, you may remember Epic partnered with Philips 10, 12 years ago to sell Epic to community hospitals. They called it Extensis, and it failed miserably and was withdrawn.
Well,
Maybe
but Vince, that's a situation where you got a vendor, Philips, who had a footprint in a lot of hospitals with their X-ray devices, and thought that they could take an X-ray device salesman and have them sell computer software, and in 40 years in this industry, I have never, ever seen that work.
Amen.
I mean, the sale process, the whole shoot and match marketing, selling, so on and so forth of software versus medical equipment is a day and night difference.
Good point.
So
Laurie, another question.
Okay, next question. Mike would like to know, isn't it easier for a vendor to integrate with a single Commonwealth rather than 50+ HIEs? That seems to be the selling point of Commonwealth.
Well,
the word integrate,
answer is yes, it is.
Yeah, but possibly. Get into semantics. The word integrate means you've got a single database, programming language, operating system, server. The word interface means you're converting data and passing it across an interface engine or a telephone line to another system and converting it back and forth. These are interfaces. An integrated system is something like Meditech has all of the clinicals and financials all together in one server. CPSI even has an integrated PACS system and time and attendance. No other vendor has that level of integration. HIEs, RIOs, interoperability by definition are interfaces. You're passing data from one engineering structure into another, translating it totally. So the word should be interface, not integrate. The only integrated systems are the few, like CPSI, Meditech, Epic. Everything else is interfaces.
I think, Vince, the other thing is the word today is interoperable. And the two gentlemen whose name escaped me for a moment, Wright, I believe, and I forget the other fellow's name, who were quoted in HIStalk about a month or two ago, published a research paper that basically said, here's a definition of interoperable, in case anybody is interested. And I fully agreed with what these guys wrote. And one of the elements in there is that vendor A can embed data in vendor B's system. And as far as I know, there is no vendor today or vendors doing that from one to the other. And if you think about just the legal implications of that, I think it's going to be a long time before anything is interoperable based upon that definition.
Semantics are so much easier than programming.
David pointed out that the statement that Epic is has a stronger system and implementation is subjective, and he'd like to know if you have any data on that.
Well, definitely subjective. The data we have is we do IT reviews and audits of about 220 client hospitals over the years. A lot with the Hunter Group, give them a lot of credit for bringing us into giant sites like Hopkins and Ochsner. A lot of little community hospitals on our own. And just from personal observations, 45 years of experience, Epic just seems to have a superb features, functionality, and implementation approach. They have their weaknesses too. Rookies scare the heck out of me. Reminds me of what I was as a rookie at SMS in 1969. I was dangerous, and Judy has those share of people. But in the long run, the Epic clients we've audited and assessed have had very good experience in general. Cerner, very good clinically, just not as strong financially. Profit couldn't hold a candle to Resolute in the old days. Now Cerner's redone it extensively, improved it a lot. They're very close. It's maybe a 9 for Epic and 8 for Cerner. But yes, it's very personal, my personal opinion, very subjective. I agree. I wouldn't trust CLAS unless CLAS publishes how much every vendor buys of their reports. And you know the amount of money that a vendor is contributing to CLAS, you can't call it objective necessarily. I don't think there is a totally objective source. You just have to put up with opinions, I fear. Frank, how do you compare the two?
Well, I would simply look at it from the standpoint that, the satisfaction surveys that you do, as well as even with CLAS. I mean, Epic consistently scores higher. So, I mean, there must be something happening there. Maybe it's not down in the bits and bytes so much, but, that's an indication of a stronger system in general. But, your point that there's pros and cons, pluses and minuses on each side is correct. And, I've always said that anybody that buys a system based on, functionality checklist because one guy checks more boxes than the other is clearly probably making a mistake. There are components and elements and capabilities in Cerner that may fit Hospital A heck of a lot better than Hospital B, and vice versa with Epic. So I mean, it behooves every institution to decide, what is important to them, what's critical to them, what's at the top of their priority list, and make your decision based on that. Whether or not somebody feels that vendor A is, quote, stronger than vendor B is an interesting observation, but that's not the way you buy a system.
Wise observations, Frank.
Do you two think that Meditech should be concerned about the continued losses?
My short answer is yes.
Yeah, I would jump in and say, when you say losses, their revenue has dropped a bit. I forget 4 or 5% from 2013 to 2014. They may be losing some of their ancient Magic clients to other vendors, Paragon, Epic, gosh knows who. But in the long run, Epic is a very well integrated, very solid system, very astute company, privately held, the same model as Epic, no stockholder pressure. Neil Pappalardo is a technical genius, probably the father of mumps. Actually, he was the mentor of Judy Faulkner, gave her a lot of her ideas when she formed Epic. The idea of hiring youngsters out of college, keeping them all at your headquarters, not selling hardware. Many of the traits that Neil started in Meditech, Judy copied in Epic. So I think Meditech's a rock-solid company. Release 6.0 seems to be completed by now. Most modules are 6.0. And this new integrated physician piece, not interface, but integrated practice management and ambulatory EHR integrated with Release 6.0 should rock. So I'm pretty bullish on Meditech. I wish they were public. I'd buy them in my pension fund instead of what's happening on Wall Street lately.
How fast are the Saurian customers jumping ship? Is there anyone actually staying on Saurian?
Well, if I remember right, the earnings call way back in October of last year, Cerner's president stated they will support Saurian for 10 years, 2014 to 2024. And I don't think Mr. Burke has changed his opinion. I think that's still what they're saying. So I would think a Saurian customer is fairly safe. The only question is how well the system's working for them, both on the clinical and financial side, and how much pressure Cerner is putting on them to sell.
Well, I think the other thing that's happened just within the last month is if you listen to the Cerner investment call, I believe it was the CFO made a comment that fewer expected customers are committing to moving to Millennium or buying additional of the former Siemens solutions as they, and his words were they're holding pat with their hands. So there's a lot of people, significant number of Saurian clients who are just kind of, still sitting back and waiting to see how things shake out and not, jumping to conclusions or making quick decisions, which is, if you read between the lines, the Cerner investment call means that they're not turning over that revenue as fast as they would have liked to. And as a public company, that could cause urgencies, if you will, down the road. As a matter of fact, one of the things they recently came out with just before that investment call was an announcement that basically said they're not going to support the Med Series clinicals going forward. I mean, they're going to limit the number of enhancements and upgrades and what have you, and not support it, I believe, for MU3, and in so many words, telling the client base that if you want MU3 and you're a Med Series clinical outfit, you're going to have to go over to Millennium. So they're beginning that process, and as we said in our first webinar, those are the kinds of things you've got to be watching for as a customer, a Saurian customer, and the more that you start seeing happening, and the more of those financial-oriented revenue slowing down statements you start hearing, that's basically the big red flag that you better get moving.
Yeah, I would say, just to summarize, you're a Siemens customer. The older your product, the quicker you should move. The newer your product, the safer you are. So the most ancient product is Envision, gosh, the financial system goes back to Shaz in the 1960s. Clinicals were introduced in 1990. Next to be Med Series, which was developed by Intermountain Healthcare back in the 80s. Then would come Eagle, the New York City revenue cycle system that goes back to around the 1980s also. Saurian is fairly new in the 2000s, so Saurian probably has the longest life cycle. You've got the most time to breathe.
Well, I think there's another part to that equation. The part you just mentioned is definitely important. I think the second part is where there's overlap. Because a software company spends a ton of money on program maintenance, software maintenance, and a lot of which is for regulatory reasons. And if I've got overlap between two products, and I need to start, cutting costs to make the profit line work, it's that overlap is where I'm going.
Interesting. So Cerner may gradually reduce the investment into Saurian over time.
Yes, I think if I'm an old Siemens client or young, whatever, look at what the modules that you're running, and first of all, look at the age vis-a-vis what Vince just said, and second of all, look for overlap. And if you hit both those buttons, you better get moving.
Okay, here's the last question I have. Is the DoD more or less likely to integrate with the VA with Cerner?
As a guy who worked at a university hospital where the VA was next door, I would be very surprised if that happens. Working with DoD is problematic enough. Working with the VA is double. And the two of them getting
VA,
together,
I believe, VA is the old Open Vista system.
Right.
In Cache.
Yep.
And Cerner, of course, is Oracle-based. So you're talking about painful interfaces like any other two vendors. So it's not going to be integrated.
And the way they'll go, quote, if they have to do it, the way they'll go about doing it is try to stick Commonwealth in the middle.
Oh. So I guess you put a brochure in between the two servers, and the data jumps in a brochure, slides over to the other server.
There you go.
Pretty good technology. Now, I'm a veteran, and thank God I didn't get injured. Because when I get admitted to a Medicare hospital, I sure wouldn't want them to see my old medical record. So I'll let you know how I do the next time I finally get hospitalized, if they can get my VA record over to it.
Well, that was our last.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, we're going to end the webinar now. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you, Frank and Vince, for another great presentation. Attendees, watch your email for links to the recording of today's webinar as well as the PDF version of the PowerPoint presentation. We look forward to seeing everyone at our next HIStalk webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.